At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, my phone shattered the silence beside my bed. I reached for it with the uneasy feeling that no good news ever arrived at that hour. The screen showed my daughter's name. The moment I answered, all I heard was desperate crying. She struggled to catch her breath before whispering, "Dad, please save me." Her voice was trembling so badly that I barely recognized it. I asked where she was and what had happened, but she never had the chance to answer. The line suddenly went dead, leaving only a cold silence that felt heavier than any words. I grabbed my keys without changing my clothes and raced into the storm. Rain hammered against my windshield as my hands tightened around the steering wheel. Every passing mile filled my mind with darker possibilities. I kept replaying her terrified voice, praying I was imagining the worst. The roads were almost empty, yet they had never seemed so long. My only thought was reaching her before it was too late. When I pulled into the driveway, every light inside the house was glowing. My heart pounded as I ran to the front door and knocked with all the strength I had. After several tense seconds, the door opened only a few inches. Standing there was my daughter's mother-in-law. Her face was strangely calm, almost rehearsed. "She's sleeping," she said in a flat voice. "You're not welcome here." I looked past her, searching for any sign of my daughter. Then I heard it. A faint cry drifted from somewhere upstairs before everything became quiet again. I stepped toward the entrance, but she blocked the doorway without hesitation. She stared directly into my eyes and spoke words that have haunted me ever since. "She's exactly where she belongs. Everyone. I have only 22 subscribers so far. My next goal is to reach 50 subscribers. If you enjoy my stories, please subscribe to my channel. Your one subscription means a lot to me. Thank you." Long before that terrible night, my daughter had been the center of my entire life. I lost my wife to cancer when our little girl was only 6 years old. Standing beside my wife's hospital bed, I made a promise that I would raise our daughter with enough love for both of us. It was a promise I never allowed myself to break. No matter how difficult life became, I worked long hours, turned down promotions that would have taken me away from home, and quietly let go of the idea of finding love again. Every decision I made revolved around one question: would this give my daughter a better future? If the answer was yes, I accepted every sacrifice without regret. Watching her grow into a kind, thoughtful, and determined young woman became the greatest reward I could have imagined. She was the kind of daughter who never forgot birthdays, who called just to ask whether I had eaten dinner, and who always left an extra chair for me whenever she imagined her future home. We shared a bond built on trust, honesty, and countless ordinary moments that meant everything to me. Then she introduced me to Daniel. At first, I had no reason to object. He was polite, well-spoken, and hardworking. He treated my daughter with patience and respect whenever I was around. His father was quiet and courteous, while his mother presented herself as a traditional woman who believed deeply in family values. During their engagement, they welcomed me warmly into their home, and I convinced myself that my daughter had found people who would care for her after I no longer could. Still, there were moments I couldn't quite explain. Daniel's mother answered questions that should have come from him. She corrected my daughter over small, harmless things and often spoke about obedience as though it mattered more than happiness. Whenever I noticed my daughter's smile fade for a brief second, she quickly covered it with another smile before anyone else seemed to notice. I mentioned my concerns once, but she gently squeezed my hand and said, "Dad, you're worrying too much. Everything is fine." After the wedding, our conversation slowly changed. She stopped calling every evening. Weekend visits became monthly excuses. Video calls turned into short voice messages. Whenever I asked the question that mattered most, she always answered the same way: "I'm okay, Dad." I wanted to believe her because every father wants to believe his child is safe. Looking back now, I understand that those 3 simple words were not reassurance. They were the quietest cry for help I had ever failed to hear. And before long, the small warning signs became impossible to ignore. The months that followed changed my daughter so gradually that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. The young woman who used to laugh before finishing a sentence now measured every word with painful care. Our conversations became shorter, and the warmth that had always filled her voice slowly disappeared. Whenever I asked how married life was treating her, she answered politely, but something inside her sounded distant, as though someone invisible was listening to every word she spoke. Then the video calls stopped altogether. She blamed poor internet service, a busy schedule, and endless household responsibilities. I accepted each excuse because trust had always been the foundation of our relationship. Still, every canceled visit left an uncomfortable weight on my heart. Holidays passed with promises that she would come next week. Birthdays became quick phone calls instead of shared dinners. The silence between us grew longer than either of us had ever allowed before. Unable to ignore my instincts any longer, I began visiting without calling ahead. Every single time, it was Daniel's mother who answered the door. Her smile never reached her eyes. "She's resting," she would say. "She has a headache. She's feeling tired today. There isn't a good time for visitors." The explanations changed, but the result never did. I was always sent home without seeing my own daughter. The few times I managed to catch a glimpse of her, I noticed things that refused to leave my mind. A fading bruise near her wrist, another along her collarbone, hidden beneath a scarf despite the warm weather. When I quietly asked what had happened, she forced a small laugh. "I'm just clumsy, Dad." Daniel, I refused to move from that doorstep. The rain soaked through my clothes, but I barely noticed. My daughter's frightened voice still echoed inside my head, and every instinct I had as a father told me she was in danger. Daniel's mother folded her arms across her chest and stared at me with complete confidence. "I've already told you," she said. "Go home before you embarrass yourself." "I'm not leaving until I see my daughter with my own eyes," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. She called me begging for help. No father would walk away after hearing that. Her expression hardened. "If you don't leave, I'll call the police and report you for trespassing." For a brief moment, I wondered if I should force my way inside. Every part of me wanted to push past her and search every room in the house, but one reckless decision could make everything worse for my daughter. I stayed where I was, refusing to surrender the only ground I had left. A few minutes later, Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. He stepped out looking calm, almost annoyed, as though I had interrupted an ordinary evening instead of responding to a desperate cry for help. Without asking why I was there, he walked straight toward me. "What are you doing here?" he demanded loudly. "You've been interfering with our marriage for months." His voice carried across the quiet street. Curtains began to move. Porch lights flickered on. Neighbors slowly gathered outside, drawn by the argument. I tried to explain. "My daughter called me. She was crying. She asked me to save her." Daniel laughed without warmth. "My wife has been under emotional stress. She's overwhelmed, and you're making it worse by refusing to let her settle into married life." Several neighbors exchanged uncertain glances. I could feel their attention shifting away from concern and toward suspicion. Then I looked up. At the top of the staircase stood my daughter. Her face was pale. Tears stained her cheeks. She gripped the railing with trembling hands as our eyes met. For one heartbreaking second, I thought she was about to run to me. Instead, Daniel's mother hurried upstairs, grabbed her arm and pulled her out of sight before she could say a single word. I shouted her name, but only silence answered. Daniel turned back to the crowd. "You all saw that," he said. "She's exhausted. My father-in-law refuses to accept that she's an adult. He's upsetting her every chance he gets." The whispers began immediately. People who had smiled at me for years now looked at me with pity, confusion, or quiet judgment. I had never felt so powerless. Every word I spoke sounded like desperation against a carefully prepared story. I finally stepped away from the house. Not because I believed them, not because I was afraid. I left because I understood something they didn't. Anger would never expose the truth. It would only help them hide it. As I drove home through the fading storm, one question refused to leave my mind. What secret were they willing to destroy my daughter's life to protect? That was the moment everything changed. They believed they had driven me away forever. They had no idea I had only stopped knocking on the front door. From that day forward, I started paying attention to everything they wanted the world to ignore. After that night, I made a decision that changed everything. I would not return to that house filled with anger. I would not give Daniel or his mother another chance to twist my emotions against me. They wanted me to look like an unreasonable father who could not accept his daughter's marriage. So I did the one thing they never expected. I became quiet, but my silence was not surrender. It was preparation. I started by speaking with people who had seen pieces of the truth when I was not around. A neighbor told me she often heard arguments late at night but was too afraid to interfere. A former employee of the household revealed that my daughter was rarely allowed to leave the house alone. Each conversation felt like another piece of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. Then I met my daughter's closest friend. The moment she saw me, tears filled her eyes. She admitted my daughter had tried to contact her several times, but Daniel had taken away her phone whenever he discovered the conversations. She said my daughter was becoming isolated from everyone who loved her. That information broke something inside me, but I forced myself to remain calm. Anger would not save my daughter. Evidence would. I contacted a local pharmacist who remembered my daughter's visits. He showed me records that revealed repeated treatments for injuries, that were never properly explained. Small incidents that had been dismissed as accidents were beginning to form a disturbing pattern. Then came the financial records. With the help of a professional, I discovered that Daniel had convinced my daughter to transfer several valuable assets into joint ownership after their marriage. At the time, she believed she was building a future with the person she loved. Now it looked like someone had been planning something very different. I thought I had uncovered everything. I was wrong. One evening, I received a phone call from a woman who had worked inside their home. She had recently quit and sounded nervous when she asked to meet me privately. When we sat across from each other, she placed a small device on the table. "I need you to hear this," she whispered. She explained that during her time in the house, she had secretly recorded several conversations because she feared something terrible was happening to my daughter. My hands trembled as I looked at the device. After everything I had discovered, I still wasn't prepared for what those recordings might reveal, because sometimes the truth does not arrive through accusations or confessions. Sometimes it arrives through the words people speak when they believe nobody is listening. For the first time in months, I felt like I was no longer fighting in the dark. I had spent so long watching my daughter suffer while people around her pretended everything was normal. But now I had something stronger than anger. I had the truth. With the help of a lawyer, I gathered every piece of evidence and filed for emergency protection. The process was not easy. There were documents to prepare, statements to organize, and painful memories to revisit. Every step forced me to remember moments when I should have seen the signs sooner, but I refused to look backward. My only goal was protecting my daughter. When the day of the court hearing arrived, Daniel walked in with the same confidence he had always carried. His mother sat beside him, calm and composed, as though they were still controlling the story. They denied everything. They claimed I was exaggerating. They claimed my daughter was simply overwhelmed. They claimed I had misunderstood their family. For a moment, I watched them repeat the same lies they had used for months. But this time, they were not standing in front of frightened neighbors or a confused father. They were standing before the truth. The lawyer placed the recording evidence before the court. When the first audio played, the entire room became silent. The confident expressions on Daniel and his mother's faces slowly disappeared. Their own voices revealed what they had spent so much time hiding. The recordings exposed the pressure they had placed on my daughter, the way they controlled her choices, and the cruel words they spoke when they believed nobody was listening. Every denial they had made began collapsing. The witnesses came forward one by one. The neighbor described the late-night arguments. My daughter's friend explained how she had been isolated. The pharmacist confirmed the repeated injuries that had never been properly explained. Then came the financial records. The documents showed how Daniel had pushed my daughter into transferring valuable assets shortly after their marriage. The man who claimed to love her had been more interested in what she owned than the life they could build together. That realization hurt more than anything, because betrayal from a stranger is painful. But betrayal from someone your child trusted is a wound that reaches a place words cannot describe. The judge reviewed the evidence carefully before making the decision. Emergency protection was granted, and further legal action was ordered based on the findings presented. For the first time, Daniel and his mother looked afraid. The same people who had once stood at the doorway and told me I had no place in my daughter's life were now facing consequences they could not escape. As they walked out of the courtroom, their confidence was gone. Their carefully created image had fallen apart in front of everyone. They had believed silence would protect them. They were wrong. Silence had only given the truth time to gather strength. Later that day, I held my daughter's hand as we walked outside the courthouse. She did not say much. She didn't need to. The relief in her eyes told me everything. Justice had finally arrived. But as I looked at my daughter, I knew the courtroom victory was only the beginning. The next challenge would be helping her heal from everything she had survived. Months passed after that painful chapter of our lives. But healing did not happen overnight. Some wounds disappear quickly. Others leave marks that remind us of what we survived. My daughter had been through something no person should ever experience. And I knew rebuilding her confidence would take time. But slowly I began seeing the daughter I remembered returning. At first, it was just small moments. A genuine smile during breakfast. A quiet joke during a conversation. A peaceful expression on her face when she realized she could make her own choices again. The fear that once lived in her eyes began to fade. One evening, I heard her laugh from the other room. It was a simple sound, but to me it meant everything. For months, that house had been filled with silence, tension, and fear. Now the same space carried something different. It carried peace. It carried hope. Most importantly, it carried the feeling that my daughter was finally free. Looking back, I often think about that night at 2 a.m., the phone call that changed everything, the trembling voice asking me to save her, the moment when I almost arrived too late. I learned a lesson I will carry for the rest of my life. The deepest wounds are not always the ones we can see. Sometimes the most painful struggles are hidden behind smiles, polite conversations, and the words, "I'm okay." I still wonder what would have happened if I had ignored that call, if I had convinced myself that my daughter was just going through a difficult phase, if I had respected the silence more than the fear in her voice. That thought stays with me. Because love is not only about being there when someone asks for help. Sometimes love means noticing the things they are too afraid to say. A person can hide pain behind a smile, but they cannot hide it forever from someone who truly cares. My daughter taught me that courage is not always loud. Sometimes courage is a father driving through the night because his heart tells him something is wrong. Sometimes courage is a person finally choosing truth over fear. And justice is not only found inside a courtroom. Sometimes justice begins the moment someone refuses to ignore a cry for help. That night, my daughter called me because she believed I would come. And I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that I answered. Hi everyone. I have only 22 subscribers so far. My next goal is to reach 50 subscribers. If you enjoy my stories, please subscribe to my channel. Your one subscription means a lot to me. Thank you.